Today we talk about protecting that hard work you put into your miniatures with a little bit of varnishing. What up, mini people? At this point in the beginner series, we've completed our model from a painting perspective. We've primed it, base coated it, shaded it, layered it, edge highlighted it, dry brushed it if necessary, and put terrain on its base. So now we come to the point where we want to protect that meticulously applied paint with a layer of varnish or finish. Varnishing is really only something we need to consider if we are painting models that are going to be used in games and handled by human beings. If we're painting for pure pleasure or for competition, we should probably avoid varnishing as it's probably unnecessary and in fact can actually harm your miniatures. Say you painted a miniature for a competition, you have all kinds of subtle blends going on. Oftentimes varnish can hide or mask these very subtle blends, so it's best not to use it. But for those of us handling the models that are going to smear our finger oils all over them, listen up. First and foremost, there are three general kinds of finish. There is glossy, which leaves the shiniest finish and oftentimes can darken colors down a little bit. There's matte, which leaves the most dull finish, no shine, and oftentimes can dull the vibrancy of our paint. And then finally there's satin finish, which is somewhere in between in regards to the sheen. High gloss finishes provide the best protection for our paint jobs, but oftentimes painters like matte finishes best. It is for this reason that a lot of painters will first apply a high gloss finish and then afterwards apply a matte finish to kind of bring that paint back in line with what it originally looked like. It's worth mentioning that you can also mix finishes to kind of get the desired sheen that you want. Another thing that's important to mention is that varnish, like primer, can be applied in a variety of ways. You can apply it with an aerosol can, with a paintbrush, or even with an airbrush. Lastly, there are tons of brands when it comes to varnishes. Companies like Liquitex, Golden, and Winsor & Newton are kinds of brands you'll find in art supply stores. These brands are originally intended for artwork on canvas and the similar. But other brands like Testors and Citadel and Vallejo are more miniature-centric brands and can oftentimes work a little bit better on miniatures but cost a lot more and come in lower quantities. When it comes to picking a brand that's best for you, it really comes down to experimentation and preference. For brushwork, it seems like most varnishes work just fine. A lot of people seem to like Testor's Dull Coat for aerosol-based application, and Vallejo seems to be the king when it comes to airbrush application. In this video, we test Vallejo airbrush application so you can see for yourself if you like it. Let's start at the beginning with application. If applying with aerosol or an airbrush, similar principles we discussed in the priming video apply now. Weather affects your performance, you don't want to be too close or too far away from the piece, and you want to apply the varnish in thin, even coats. Additionally, shake up the varnish really well, especially matte varnish. If you fail to do this, oftentimes matte varnish will come out looking glossy. Also, avoid varnishing on humid days. This can oftentimes cause the varnish to apply fuzzily. To fix this if it happens to you, I've heard you can brush off the fuzz with warm water. If your varnish looks pebbly or grainy, it's because you're either applying varnish too far away or you didn't sufficiently water down the varnish. Oh yeah, did I mention that? If you're applying varnish through an airbrush, water it down. Like paint, I can't give you an exact ratio. Experimentation with your brand is necessary. When it comes to applying it with a brush, water it down in the same way and apply it thinly not to gunk up any details. Here's our test model with all three sheens of varnishes applied with an airbrush. Which do you prefer? Here's the model before varnishing next to all the airbrush applications. Can you see how the finish affects the color? One myth I wanted to dispel that kind of got stuck into my head when I first got into miniature painting all those years ago was that when you put varnish on a miniature, you can no longer paint it. This is totally false. The only reason why people think this maybe is because glossier finishes don't accept paint as good as matte finishes. Matte finishes will accept paint just as normal, like if you were painting the model, so don't worry about that if you apply varnish ahead of time. Well, now you're all pros at varnishing, and you know the entire process for painting a miniature from plastic to protection. So what I expect out of you guys is a whole bunch of painted units. And when you finish those units, don't forget to submit them to the community highlight, which you can find a link for in the description of this video. Speaking of, this week's community highlight comes from a friend of mine from the Warhammer subreddit, Akimbo Gogurts. I love the stubble on his interrogator chaplain. I love how clean his Justicar is, and how vibrant the red on his Skitaria Alpha is. Additionally, Akimbo also just fired off a website that is dedicated to journalism for miniature wargaming. On the website, you'll find all kinds of articles regarding the current state of the game, new releases, and much more. You'll find a link to the website in the description of this video. If you know a mini man or woman who could benefit from the information found in this video, please share it with him or her. But most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis. Glue, which is a type of PVA glue with a bit of extra tackiness. Use a crappy brush and coat the top of your mini's base in straight glue. You can test the brush by running it along your thumb. If too much paint is catching on the texture of your thumb, wipe more off. As you can see, this kind of dry brushing is a messy